has really been the motive force of the Berkeley Math Circle. When David Eisenbud and I came here in 1997, we decided that MSRI should have some kind of impact on mathematics education, and I sent a memo to the members. At that time, Zvezda was a postdoc here, and I said, anybody have any ideas, come and see me. Well, in 20 minutes, Zvezda was in my office and said, let's get together with Paul Zeitz and cook something up. And that's essentially how it started. So here she is, Zvezda Lena Stankova of Mills College.
Thank you. I'm very glad I can see all these friendly and familiar faces I've seen across the country, and a lot more that I've heard about, but finally I get to meet them. One person with whom I have worked before and who has been trailing all of our Olympiad training for the International Math Olympiad of the US team, who has been interviewing us everywhere, non-stop, whether we were with the team or relaxing, he was there to ask us questions that resulted in writing this wonderful book, Countdown: 6 Kids Vie for Glory at the World's Toughest Math Competition. This book is about the International Math Olympiad 2001 that happened in Washington, D.C., and 3 of the kids on the 6-member U.S. team were very much associated with the Berkeley Math Circle and the San Jose Math Circle. So to talk about this and a lot more, I present to you Steve Olson.
Thanks. I think I'll use this if it's working. Yeah, it sounds like it is. I interview people almost all the time and almost anywhere, but not quite everywhere. It's a very ambitious agenda that this conference has set for itself, and I think it's going to take a lot of work from everyone here to be able to do it. But I'm also interested in broadening the conversation a bit to talk about math education in general. And so in that way, my talk sort of fits into the second session as well as the first session. And I think there's 2 good reasons for talking about math education. One is that the broader context, I think, is going to make a big difference in the success of what this conference is trying to do. And I also think that what we do in setting up math circles and math competitions can also have an effect on math education if we're sort of aware of the secondary effects of these activities on all kids. So when you look at that broader context, it always has sort of encouraging aspects and discouraging aspects. We've heard about some of those already this morning. And I thought what I might do is talk a little bit about my experiences with math competitions. Of course, everyone here has their own set of experiences, and I really don't know the extent to which my experiences are representative of what people encounter when they get involved in these activities from the outside. But I'm always interested in hearing your stories. I'm a journalist. I'm always looking for good stories. So if you have a chance to tell me yours, I'd be happy to hear it. So I've been working with math clubs and math competitions for the past 8 years, essentially while my 2 kids, who are now a 10th grader and an 8th grader, went through elementary school, middle school, and now high school. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, which is a pretty well-to-do suburb close in from Washington, D.C. The National Institutes of Health is about a couple miles away from my house, but there's not a university nearby. The University of Maryland and Georgetown, oh yes, we'll move this over here. And George Mason are all kind of a drive away. I mean, you can get there, but they're really not next door.
Turn it on.
So it must be this microphone. Maybe I'll use the other one? Maybe I'll just, okay. My wife, now the reason we live in Bethesda, Maryland is my wife is a very well-known education writer, and we moved to Bethesda, Maryland because of the reputation of its schools. However, in neither of my kids' elementary school or in their middle school was there a math team or any kind of extracurricular math activity when we went to those schools until I started lobbying for it. Now, it was relatively easy for me to find a teacher who was willing to sponsor these activities as soon as I expressed interest in helping them do that. And then as soon as these clubs got started, I sort of ran into this additional frustration. My kids go to very large schools. There are 1,400 kids in my daughter's middle school right now, and I have to struggle to get 20 kids to come to our after-school math activity. Now, these kids have a lot of other things to do, and that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to get to them. But there's another factor of attitudes that is at work in middle schools, and I'm sure all of you encountered. The other day, I do the math club every Wednesday after school. The 8th grader came in with a camera to take photographs for the yearbook. And the kids in my math club were very reluctant to pose for these photographs, either as a group or as individuals. I said, and so after they finally did it, and I encouraged them all up there. And after the photographer left, I said, what's the problem? How come you guys don't want to be in the yearbook? And they said, because we can imagine the captions that they're going to put under these photographs once they appear in the yearbook. And I had to agree with them that there's these kids do face a little bit of ridicule for engaging in these activities in middle school. And I think it's really one of the reasons that we see these declining percentages of math majors and of interest in math because of some of the attitudes these kids face. I mean, you only have to go to this movie Mean Girls, which maybe some of you saw, to see some of these stereotyped attitudes about math clubs that really do have an influence on kids and their behavior, especially in middle school where they're so aware of these sort of social currents. Now, the high school that my son attends right now does have a very active math program that's run by Susan Wildstrom. Some of you may know Susan because she did the publicity for the IMO 2001 with her husband. But that raises another issue because Susan is just about to retire. And when she retires, I'm not sure that there's going to be another teacher at that high school who's going to be willing to step up and certainly sponsor this activity to the extent she has. We've encountered this problem already in middle school. The teacher that I've been doing the math club with is about to retire. And among the 10 middle school math teachers there, I can't find a single one who is enthusiastically going to fill the position that she's been filling. So these activities, my experience with these activities has been that there's a fair amount of isolation of these activities and marginalization that goes on, especially in middle schools and elementary schools. So when I think about ways to try to counter that, it seems to me that one thing that needs to be done is these extracurricular math activities need to be integrated more into the general education of mathematics in a school. And I sort of see two ways of doing that. One is through the curriculum and one is through the teachers. And in some ways the curriculum is the easier one, so I'm going to talk about that first. One of the ways I sell my math club to reluctant middle school kids is I go to them, I say to them, this is complete. The math we do after school is completely unlike the math that you do in math classes. This math is fun. And so, and they sort of react to that, and after they've been doing this math for a while, they understand that. So why is it that the math that they're being taught all day leaves them with such a sour taste in their mouth that they're reluctant to come to math club? A couple years ago, I worked as an editor on the principles and standards for school mathematics that the NCTM put out and published 2 or 3 years ago. And I was surprised to find in those principles and standards really a very compatible outlook on math education that fits very well with the kinds of things that people in this group are trying to do. The standards really are focused on problem solving. They really are focused on having both the conceptual understanding and the computational fluency to do the kinds of problems that arise in math clubs at the middle school level and at the high school level. And the standards are not necessarily focused on just sort of procedural, simple problem solving skills. They really do emphasize the need to push these kids along. I just want to read you one little section from the standards that I was looking at yesterday. It says, students should view the difficulty of complex mathematical investigations as a worthwhile challenge rather than as an excuse to give up. Even when a mathematical task is difficult, it can be engaging and rewarding. This is totally foreign, by the way, to the kids who come to my math club. They really believe that if they can't get it in 10 seconds, then it's not worth working on. When students work hard to solve a difficult problem or to understand a complex idea, they experience a very special feeling of accomplishment, which in turn leads to a willingness to continue and extend their engagement with mathematics. So I really have, in my book, I mentioned the standards as a possible way to go here. Many of you know that the implementation of the standards in schools has really lagged for a variety of reasons, and it's been a very slow process to get the standards in there. But that sort of brings me to my second point, which is teachers. It's always seemed to me that the community of people in this room are really a very valuable resource for teachers of mathematics in middle school and high school. That those teachers of mathematics can look at the kinds of activities that we do and ask themselves, how can I incorporate more of these activities into my classroom? So one thing we need to do is we need to have ways of letting people see what it is that we're doing, and that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. These videotapes, Dave mentioned these, I'm going to have to take a look at these videotapes with popular figures doing math, because I think it is one way of showing kids that math can be a different sort of activity than what they're used to. ESPN has begun to televise the Math Counts National Finals, and it really is quite engaging television. I show it to my math club, and they love it. And my suspicion is that if kids in regular math classes were shown this as well, shown these kids, having fun in sort of this pressure-packed athletic type situation, that at least some of them would be attracted to that. The other issue that I'm very interested in forwarding is the idea of having these activities available in every school. Because here I am moving into one of the best school districts in the nation, supposedly, and just having a complete absence of these activities. I once asked the executive director of Math Counts what it would take for Math Counts to be available and offered in every single middle school in the country, and she just rolled her eyes like that's just an impossible thing to even conceive of, much less the amount of work that would be done. But there are steps being made in that direction. The most recent Math Counts newsletter talks about the District of Columbia, which has started a program to do math counts in every single one of the 100+ schools in the district that have a 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. And they're all going to use the handbook, and they're all going to send teams to the chapter competition. So it is possible to sort of start small in these ways and then go up from there. I think that as a book writer, I know that a lot of people don't necessarily get their information from books. They get it in a lot of different ways. And one thing we need to do is make the kinds of things we do available in a lot of different formats. So on the web and in videotapes and in magazines, because the more different channels that we use to try to get teachers and kids interested in these activities, the better off we'll be. So those are just some of my thoughts. I'm sure everybody here has some good ideas, and I'd really be very eager to hear about them as far as promoting this high-level problem solving in a much broader context. Thanks. Think somebody wants this?
Yes, maybe.
Okay, let's see. Wait, are you next?
Ellis, and I'll just read a little bit about him. He graduated with AB in mathematics in Oberlin College in Ohio, after which he did some graduate work in mathematics and history in University of Oregon and graduate work in education in University of Michigan, and he received MS in mathematics from the Ohio State University. He has taught for over 20 years at West Valley Community College in Saratoga, California. And he is currently the second vice president of the Mathematical Association of America. He has a long service record and many, many awards, which I have written here, but due to our short time, I'm going to skip. However, I will give all these notes to the MSRI website, so you can read all about him, but let me just mention a few. Among his many honors, Association of Two-Year Colleges Mathematics Excellent Award, the Outstanding Civilian Service Medal of the United States Army, Award for Excellence in Education from the California Academic Senate, Distinguished College or University Mathematics Teaching Award, and he has published quite a number of books and articles ranging from Greek math and a lot more. So I present to you Wade Ellis.
Thank you very much. You may have wondered about my early educational experiences and also this Army award. It seems that early in my career I was interested in avoiding the Army. For those of you who go back far enough and remember the Vietnam War. I've got 3 things to say. I've got 5 minutes to say them, I'm told. This is actually the 45-minute talk, but from one slide, I believe in being elegant and brief, at least on the slides. At West Valley College, we have over the years given regularly the Putnam exam. And West Valley College is a 2-year college, and why are you giving a Putnam exam? And by the way, community college students don't know very much. And what could they benefit from a Putnam exam? So there's one of the things that's out there in the world is some people can do mathematics and some people can't. And as a consequence, these are controversial kinds of things, and I apologize in advance in making them, in that all of us, me included, do the Booker T. Washington thing. We throw down our buckets where we are. And when we throw down our buckets where we are, we get people that look like us. Now, of course, that's kind of a little strange for me to say in a group like this, is I'm pretty much a different color than almost everybody here. And that's a problem as well that we need to address over time. But throwing down my buckets where I was at West Valley College, every now and then we get an exceptional student. And I have had 2 students of mine that have taught as freshmen and sophomores have scored in the top 150 on the Putnam exam. We have at West Valley College, on the American Mathematical Association of 2-year colleges, we've won that competition in past years. We haven't been doing so well lately, but we've won. And one of the things I'd like to spread the news about is there are non-traditional students out there that are older, different, and are wonderful mathematical students who are inexperienced in mathematics. And so as we build these circles, we shouldn't just think about, well, let's do the middle school and high school. There are other parts of the community that we can work with. But then getting to what seems to be the thrust of this particular conference, I worked with the Young Scholars Program at The Ohio State University, and folks will say immediately, well, that's the Arnold Ross program. No, there was another one that was intended for children of the great state of California, Ohio, pardon me. Yeah, all right. When you say great state, it's got to be followed by California. At The Ohio State University, there was a program for about 400 students from 7th to 11th grade, or 6th to 11th grade, rising 7th graders, to improve their overall educational outlook. And you had to be on aided dependent children to get into it. And no one in your family could ever have graduated from college. So we were looking at a different group than the sorts that you ordinarily look at in Olympiad kinds of competitions or in mathematical circles. And there were several things that came out of this. There were some students, inexperienced, yes, that were very able mathematically in this group, which was predominantly African American, but there were some rural Appalachian folks as well that were European American. So it was a quote unquote slightly diverse group. But it was great to see that there were people in that arena that could perform at a higher level in mathematics if given the chance. And a major part of that program was, we're not going to teach, as we heard about in Moscow and Russia, we're not going to teach anything from the high school system, because we don't want these students to be punished when they go back to the schools about knowing more. There is basic anti-intellectualism in the United States that Steve Olson mentioned earlier that causes students not to want to do things. And if they seem to know more in school, teachers will even punish them. Right? So, well, geez, that's a rather broad. Some teachers somewhere will do that sort of thing. And it doesn't take very many to discourage students in seeking additional mathematics activities. One of the strongest things about the Young Scholars Program was what it did to teacher perceptions of what students from this category could do, both mathematically and in other fields. And finally, I'd like to talk about the International Mathematical Olympiad, which I was associated with back in the 2001 version that occurred in Washington, D.C. I guess a lot of money was spent, but it didn't spread the news very far. And I suggested over and over and over again, as treasurer of the organization, that we should go out, first, seek more money. Mathematicians are terrible at seeking money from anybody else than the NSF, apparently, or perhaps the Defense Department. That we should go out and seek money to spread the word. If you look at a map of where the pins are for successful Olympiad activities and where they're coming from, they're very concentrated. And they're places where large parts of the United States are empty of any of these things. Rural America falls into that class. And I even said, well, gee, we know there's some places where they have instructors or whatever, but certainly teachers, and let's start there because we know how to deal with that, who are really good at this, like Mark Saul and other people like that. Let's go to the regional NCTM conferences and have conferences about how to do this. Well, there wasn't any money to do that, but there was money to spend, and it did come from the Clay Foundation, which is a wonderful foundation, for a $300,000 dinner at the end of the IMO. Right? So I think we have to change some of our attitudes about what's important and who we should spend money on. And spending money on the 6 American students that Steve wrote about and the 500 or 600 students overall that were at the IMO, that's a reasonable thing to do. And we shouldn't slight those really smart kids, and there's some tendency in the United States to do that as well. We shouldn't slight them, but we shouldn't forget about everybody else either. So that's sort of my message, that we need to look more broadly than we are looking in searching for mathematical talent, and it's out there. And, well, you can only get these people, and they usually say it that way, to a certain level. And I heard a former president of the MAA say of the folks coming from Potsdam, and some of you may know that Potsdam had, once upon a time, an extremely powerful mathematics undergraduate program, at least in terms of its success. You can't expect them to do well in graduate school. They're blue collar. So we need to try to move away from that. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but that's one of the things that several of the things that we need to do. Thank you very much.
Wade mentioned some other groups that were not addressed yet in our discussion. Groups of people that would also excel very much if given the chance. Well, I have one particular such group in mind, and it's the parents. When we first opened the Berkeley Math Circle, we had to make very strict rules about the parents not trying to attend the sessions by raising their hands and speaking out of turn, trying to answer the questions instead of their own sons and daughters right there. They were so enthusiastic about that. And I actually think later on we'll talk maybe in the last session about the networking for parents. And that is quite a powerful group of people, maybe even more powerful than the teachers themselves as far as the United States is concerned. So that was just a side remark from Wade's talk. And I will call back to the stand Bob Megginson, this time to talk about his own personal experiences rather than citing NSF data.
I'm going to cite a little bit of NSF data. Heck, it's there. Why not use it? Where did it go? Here we go. Ah. But I'll go through it fairly quickly.
I'm going to actually, I will say a few things about some of my personal experiences, but in the interest of time, I think, rather than tell you lots and lots of war stories about doing mathematics programs on Indian reservations, I think what I'll do instead is emphasize some of the, I don't know, lessons learned, but not so much perhaps that, but just perhaps some points tossed out that you might want to think about in designing math circles. So this is, again, the session's about discovering and developing mathematical talent, so I want to talk about a few cultural considerations. And I will probably be revisiting a few points that Wade has already made, but I'll try to come at them from a little bit different perspective. Just real briefly, I think we all know what the issue is. If you define underrepresented minorities in mathematics to be primarily the three large underrepresented groups. I use large with my own group, Native Americans, in a certain relative sense. But African Americans, Chicano Latino, U.S. Hispanics, in other words, Native Americans and other Native peoples in the area that's now the United States. Recently, that's run over 25% of the population. July 2003 is 27.1%. So how are we doing with getting mathematics degrees? We're getting them at about half that rate at the undergraduate level, and though I'm not going to show you the statistics for what happens past that, it falls off more rapidly there than the general population does. So certainly, if we want to get more students involved, if we want to recruit, retain more mathematical talent, we can't afford to throw away that more than 1/4 of the talent that's there. We have to think about some of the issues that may be causing numbers like this one that you see up there. Certainly, math circles and math Olympiads could help in finding, developing, and retaining such talent through to degrees in mathematics, but we have to ask ourselves if there are some design flaws that are perhaps keeping this from happening. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to talk just a bit about problems that you would face in case you decided you wanted to have math circles, say, on an Indian reservation. These are problems that I have faced in having mathematics programs on Indian reservations, things you should know about, things that you should consider in designing perhaps programs for groups besides the majority and other groups that such programs traditionally draw. I'm going to issue two quick disclaimers. I'm not advocating that you abandon the models that you know already work well for quite a few kids, just to think about issues that might be keeping others from participating maybe fully. And the other one, you all know this, I just want to point out to you that I know it too. If I make statements about, in here somewhere, about what Native Americans believe or such things, it's of course always dangerous to take any generalizations about populations and apply them to individuals. So I don't intend any statements that I make about the way that Native American populations would react as predictions of how particular individuals might react. So with that out of the way, here's one of the first problems that you would face, and believe me, I face this every time I do a program on an Indian reservation. It's the no child left behind with a vengeance syndrome, okay? In other words, as soon as you have a program that's designed to keep, is designed to attract very, very bright, exceptional individuals, the comment you're going to get broadly from the community is that is not our problem. What you really need to be doing here is designing programs that are going to bring along all of the other students that are being left behind. Okay, what to do about that? There's a challenge there. Generally, it's best met, I think, by meeting both of those needs. If you have such programs that you're providing to help truly exceptional individuals excel and to challenge them, at the same time, it's helpful to have other programs, other activities that will provide mathematics enrichment activities for all. That can be a very strong selling point for doing the other within the community and really help enlist the community to your programs, because they will see that there is something there that you're doing for everybody and at the same time helping their really exceptional students excel. One problem that was identified in 1975 in a very early study done by the American Association for the Advancement of Science about why Native Americans don't participate more in mathematics is that mathematics in some sense oftentimes is a competition-based activity. And the challenge is that that is a particular cultural value that's not so much valued within Native American cultures. And I do see this within programs that I try to run. Doesn't mean that there's no place for Math Olympiad type experiences, but perhaps also other capstone experiences for a math circles experience that would perhaps de-emphasize culture a little more, might attract more students. Something to consider. Not to abandon, say, the Math Olympiad model as a capstone experience, but to have other options for that too. National American Indian Science and Engineering Fair each year has both types of activities. They draw slightly different students, but it's great because that way the program works for everybody. The teacher problem. If you come in and you prepare students to go back to this classroom and challenge their teachers, you become the teacher's enemies, unfortunately. Because too many of those teachers are very well-meaning individuals who are dedicating their lives to helping a certain population, but they are not well trained in mathematics. They feel very defensive oftentimes about their mathematics skills. If you are taking their students away from them part of the time and returning them to them in such a state that they are going to be challenging the teachers, asking them for more interesting stuff that the teachers can't give them, then it will make the teachers very uncomfortable and probably resent you. One way to work around that, which we all oftentimes do when working in Native American communities, is to have activities for the teachers also. I know others have mentioned this too. They will very much appreciate it. It helps bring them along, bring them to your side, and makes them comfortable with the idea when a student comes with a question that it's okay to say, I don't know, because mathematicians oftentimes have to give that answer too. So once you become aware of that, I think that it's much easier to recruit the teachers to your side, but you need to be aware of that. Another thing, traditional measures of mathematical promise just might not bring in all the students that you are interested in having in the program. It's not reasonable that you could have a population with 2,000 students in it and not one of them would be ready to participate in any sense in these programs. And yet sometimes when you look, for example, at standardized scores and standardized tests, you might see that. You might see populations of Choctaw in Mississippi that are scoring on average 13% at the 13th percentile level, and you can find nobody that's above the 25th percentile level. If you can reach some of those students early, though, they can be brought along very rapidly, you'll discover, because like any population, there will be exceptional individuals there. It's just that they may not have the preparation to fully participate in your program. So keep that in mind and try to be broad in your thinking about who could benefit. Another thing that was mentioned here too, parents. And I'm very glad that we're going to have an entire session to talk about parents, because Native American parents really have to be convinced that you're going to do well by their children, or they will not want you to work with them. So you have to have activities for the parents to draw them in and to convince them that this is really a valuable thing for their children. Finally, I just added this 2 days ago as I was polishing up this presentation, because Rich Scarlatti, who was originally going to be giving this presentation and was not able to. He's Native American himself. He's a teacher at an Indian school in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. Sent this message, which he asked me to pass along to you, so I will. If I were there, I would say that what I have noticed in the math competition problem sets that I give at the National American Indian Science and Engineering Fair, most young students don't even understand the concept of a problem. They have not been introduced to problem solving by their teachers, especially in grades 5 to 8. The average score there is less than what they would get by guessing, because of the fact that the distractors on those problems are good. Okay, they tend to be multiple choice. That's the bad news. The good news is that high school students who have an opportunity to try the problems over a period of years because they come to the fair every year start to do quite well. This is something, of course, math circles, math Olympiads could do for these also. I think most Native kids don't get an opportunity to do problem solving, many times because the teachers spend too much time teaching the basics. If you can, please pass this on. Rich, I have done so. Thank you very much.
Where is Tim? Did you need an overhead? Nothing. Okay, so we need to dismantle all of this. And while they're doing it, we will move from the Indian reservations to Africa and India. So let me explain. Tim Sanders graduated in 1996 from Washington University in St. Louis with majors in mathematics and anthropology and a minor in physics. In 1999, he received a Master of invited to compete in the regional championship each May. He has served on the executive board of the American Regions Math League since 1998 as recording secretary, president, and past president beginning this year. Now to the Africa and India part. Tim spent much of the last year and a half in Africa and India working with students and teachers to develop extracurricular problems in problem solving and math competitions. He worked in Botswana with students and teachers from Botswana, Namibia, and Mozambique, and helped implement an offshoot of the Research Science Institute in Southern Africa. He dedicated 2 months of last fall to hosting problem-solving workshops and math competitions in India, and he returned to Africa this year for 3 more months to continue work on the project. Venues for these workshops and competitions included schools in Namibia, Mozambique, and a new Math and Science Academy in Cape Town, at which Tim spent 2 more months in residence. This summer, Tom worked for the Art of Problem Solving in San Diego. Presenting to you, Tim Sanders.
Good morning, everyone. Really glad to be here, and just wanted to give you a little bit of most recent background on myself. I just yesterday I finished my first semester of classes at Stanford Law School, and I'm really excited to be in the Bay Area because of things like this. In looking at where I was going to go to law school, I decided that I wanted to be in the Bay Area because there were a lot of interesting things happening here, and I'm really glad to be a part of this workshop today. I was told that I don't have much time to speak, but fortunately the previous 3 speakers have already said much of what I needed to say anyway. But I wanted to start off following up a little bit on what Bob just mentioned, in terms of working with students in underprivileged communities, and particularly my work in Africa and India over the last couple of years. The whole process started last June when I went with Mark Saul to Botswana for 3 weeks to work on a project that was funded by the Center for Excellence in Education, or administered by the Center for Excellence in Education, the same group that organizes the RSI program at MIT, and we were trying to get something going in Africa as well. And it was a really great opportunity. This program in particular brought in not only students from various countries in Southern Africa, but also some teachers. And I think one of the real strengths of doing a program like that was that it touched on one of Bob's points in the previous talk about how you've got to get the teachers on board with programs like this. If we're approaching the students and working with them, developing their talent, a lot of times, the teachers will feel threatened, particularly if we're dealing with underprivileged communities and areas where the teachers themselves may come from those communities and not have had the access to mathematical education that would allow them to really help the students as much as they would like. And so I found that in working with some of these communities, it really helps to get the teachers involved in the programs as well. And one of the things that really helped when I was in Africa was the fact that the teachers were, I always invited the teachers to compete, or to participate in the workshop, because I think that I think that's very helpful for the teachers to have that opportunity, and they were very eager to do that. I think a lot of it had to do, particularly when I was overseas, with the fact that some expert is coming from America to help teach, and all the teachers wanted to participate as well. But I think that no matter where you are working with students, I think it's always a good idea to try to work with the teachers as well. And I think that those of us in this room may have a unique opportunity to do that. I know a lot of teachers that when I was teaching, a lot of my colleagues were kind of defensive when one of their peers would attempt to teach them something. We'd always go to these state math teachers conferences and just sit in the back and cut up instead of actually listening to the presenters, because they were our peers and everything, right? You're not, you weren't interested in listening to your peers talk about something. But I think that in the case of the people in this room, many of us are recognized experts in the field of mathematics education, particularly within math circles and math competitions. And so we may have a unique opportunity that other teachers don't have, to get participation from our colleagues in participating in math circles or coming to workshops that we present, where they're actually going to feel like they can get something out of this. And like I said, I found this to be particularly the case when I was in Africa. A lot of the teachers there, this is a very unfortunate aspect of the education system I encountered in Southern Africa, is that there were a lot of teachers who were back in the schools teaching after only having gotten a 12th grade math education themselves. And these teachers recognize that they need help in mathematics, and when we had an opportunity to bring some Americans who have advanced degrees in math education to these countries, we found that the teachers were very eager to participate as well. And I found that in terms of one of the things that Wade was talking about, addressing geographically underrepresented areas, it was really important for me to go back to Africa this spring after having been there for a month last year, because a lot of the teachers and students that I worked with last year at one site went back to their schools and began talking about the program and encouraging their colleagues and the students in their local areas. Then when I returned to Africa this spring, I actually did some on-site visits in Namibia and Mozambique at some of the schools where the teachers and students had come to the program last year. And by doing this, I was able to reach a lot more students than I was just able to reach at the program. And also, it was very encouraging to see that the students and teachers who had come to our program had gone back to their schools and stirred up a lot of encouragement about mathematics, and many of them had even shown some of the techniques and the problem-solving lectures that we had given to the other members of their community. And so it was really exciting to go back to Africa, and after a 6-month hiatus, and then to see how much this had spread in the other countries. And then I got a chance in each of those countries then to work with teachers who will probably be able to go back to their communities as well. Particularly, like in Namibia, I had a chance to work with teachers from many different areas. They all came into this central area, and then they were all going to go back to their local areas. So I think that this kind of opportunity is really excellent in enabling us to reach out to those underrepresented geographical areas. I want to share just a little bit about some of the work that I've done in the Midwest. As was mentioned, I was a student at Washington University back in the early 90s. And having come from a tradition of math competition in Texas myself, I got to Missouri and I said, I asked my old ARML coach how I could get involved with the ARML team there. And his response was, well, there's not a team in Missouri. There never has been. So I was like, well, we've got to fix this. So basically what I did is tried to get together with some local teachers and set up a program where we were going to recruit students for the ARML competition from Missouri. So we needed, that's an R. So we needed to get students for the ARML competition. Now, how do you get students for the ARML competition? Well, for those of you that don't know, ARML is basically like the high school equivalent of math counts. You get a team of students together and they go off and you probably all know what ARML is. If not, you can look it up at arml.com. So anyway, I wanted to get some students from Missouri in this national math contest. Okay, how do I find these students? Well, I knew of some other competitions that were already out there. Math Counts and the AMC program. What I found, though, in trying to recruit students for ARML the first few years was that we had, there were students who had participated in Math Counts. I tried to recruit them for ARML, and in the part of the country that I was working in, the students who had been to Math Counts pretty much decided that the questions at ARML were of a level that was sufficiently more advanced than Math Counts that it was tough to make the transition to ARML, and so they were a little hesitant to join the ARML program coming out of Math Counts. Students who had participated at the AMC contest many of them had only participated in school contests, contests that they didn't have to travel for, that were only held in their own classroom, and they'd never had any experience going to any math contest, and so they were hesitant to make the first ever trip, one that was to a national contest site. So what we did is, with a group of teachers there in Missouri, we organized what eventually became known as the Great Plains Math League, and you can look up some information about that at mathleague.org if you're interested in finding out the details of the contest. But basically what we did is we identified that we needed something to bridge the gap between math counts and ARML, something to bridge the gap between AMC and ARML. And what we did is we came up with this local program, the Great Plains Math League, that kind of took in students from math counts as they were exiting junior high. We had a program that was offered for grades 9 through 12 with questions that were of a little bit more accessible level than those of ARML. So students from math counts could transition into GPML. Once they had some experience with GPML, they could move on up to the ARML problems. Students in Missouri who had only previously participated in AMC contests could then go to something like GPML, which only involves maybe traveling to another school in your city, but at least you're getting the experience of going to a math contest, meeting with other students and that sort of thing. And then from there, the students who excelled at GPML then ended up transitioning well into the ARML program. So the key step in this process was recognizing that from our recruitment pool of students who might go to the ARML competition from Missouri, we needed some way to funnel those students in a way that would prepare them adequately to actually compete in the ARML program. And so what we did is we began this math league so that we could provide those opportunities for students. One of the things that I think was a real advantage of this program was that we were operating at a local level. It was kind of a grassroots organization at first and has since expanded to be the state championship organization. Similar procedures happen in Iowa and Kansas, but we've started in Missouri at first, so that's why I've been talking so much about Missouri here. But what we found is that not only has participation in ARML really improved in Missouri over the last 10 years, whereas we started 10 years ago, now Missouri typically sends 2 teams, one of which placed in the top 10 this year. We've also seen participation in the AMC contest increase because, we've seen, I can't say that for sure, I don't have the data. GPML is a much smaller program, admittedly, than a program that can be done in the schools, but we have seen some improvement, I should say, in the scores for AMC in Missouri since the GPML program was implemented, in the sense that when we started GPML, it was typical that each year Missouri would have only 1 student that qualified for the USMO, whereas this year I think we had over half a dozen, one of which went on to the IMO. So we have seen not only that GPML ends up bridging the gap between these competitions, but has also enhanced students' performance at each of the others, or at least students' performance has been enhanced since the GPML program was instituted. I think one of the real strengths of this program, though, is the fact that we are a local grassroots organization that reaches into a lot of the schools, whereas sometimes you'll see Olympiads or math contests that are targeted only to the top students in a state or something like that. This one, we have several different sites throughout the year where students can compete at various levels. There's a local level, and then the winners go to state, and then on from there. So we have contests at many different levels, and I think this provides opportunities for more students to get involved because the barriers to entry are low enough that they can get involved, and then there are also opportunities through the hierarchy of competition for them to further excel. So then the real way in which this relates to our group, like I was mentioning before, is with respect to our roles as leaders within the math education community and the math contest community. Because what we did with GPML in Missouri is we identified a state that did not have a statewide on-site mathematics championship, a state that did not have an ARML program, and got together a coalition of math teachers to make this happen. And there are a lot of other states right now that do not have statewide high school math championships, a lot of states that don't have ARML teams, a lot of states that are not as well represented in the math contest community as some of the states along the East Coast in California and Texas and places like those. And our role, or our opportunity, I should say, as leaders in the math contest community is that we're the ones who have the resources available that we can actually help make these things happen. So my challenge to you would be, for those parts of the country that are underrepresented right now in mathematics competitions, here's an opportunity for us to get involved in helping to get those areas represented. As leaders in the math education community, even if we're not located in some of these underrepresented areas, it's very likely that we have professional contacts in those areas, and thereby perhaps have access to sufficient networks of colleagues who can actually help organize grassroots organizations like this, whether it be a math competition or math circles or any number of different activities that can engender greater participation in mathematics in some of these underrepresented areas. So I was really glad to have the opportunity to do this where I came from, and I just want to point out that it's that the opportunity is before all of us, and I hope that we're able to do something with it. Thanks.